All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started.
Okay.
First of all, welcome to Sharing Hope, a conversation about mental health with and for people of color. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody on live, as well as Tanisha and Bill. We're coming to you today on the NAMI page. NAMI is a National Alliance on Mental Illness. They are the nation's greatest grassroots mental health organization. They provide advocacy, education, support, and public awareness. So a few things to just talk about before we start with the questions. Everybody has mental health. However, 1 in 5 individuals have a mental illness of some kind. Any part of the body, including the brain, can get sick, and that's what leads to mental illness. It can occur at any age, but 50% of people who will live with mental illness will begin to have signs by the age of 14.
Wow.
Depression is one of the most common mental illnesses or mental health issues and affects more than 17 million people each year. African Americans are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than adult whites. However, they are less likely to seek out treatment and more likely to end therapy early. Suicide is the third leading cause of deaths among African Americans between the ages of 15 and 24. African American men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than African American women. A lack of information and misconceptions about mental health create a stigma, which might prevent many people in our community from getting help. Cultural biases against mental health professionals also plays a part of that. Today, we're going to have an open and honest discussion about mental health and mental illness from the perspective of someone living with it, as well as a family member. We had part 1 of this discussion last week, and that was with a faith leader and a mental health specialist. So if you missed part 1, you can check that out. It's on YouTube or on the NAMI page. And today I'm so happy to be joined by Tanisha Brown. She is coming to us with the perspective of a peer. She is someone who lives with extreme depression and anxiety. And we also have Bill Brown with us also, who is going to be talking with us from the perspective of a family member. So if you would each like to just take a moment to introduce yourself, Tanisha, if you'd like to start, ladies first.
I sure will. As stated before, my name is Tanisha Brown. I currently live with severe depression and anxiety. Right now, I'm a crisis service coordinator for Contact Lifeline, and that's a line dealing with the National Suicide Prevention Line. We also take sexual assault calls and crises of any sort. A majority of my life, I've worked in human services and has dealt with my depression. I've relapsed several times and currently now in the recovery phase and feel really good about where I'm going.
Good. Glad to hear that. And Bill, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Brown. No relation to Tanisha, not that I know.
Brown.
We got to get that straightened out. We're talking about family members and people who are suffering. So I'm on the end stage of the situation. So my situation occurred about maybe 20 years ago. So I'm coming from that perspective. I work now with Brandywine Counseling and Community Services. I'm a case manager there, and I've been there for about 3 years, and I'm enjoying my work.
Oh, that's very good. Well, again, thank you both so much for joining me. I'm going to start with my first question is going to be for Tanisha. Can you briefly tell us at what age you were first diagnosed, and did you recognize the signs, or did someone point them out to you?
I was first diagnosed when I was in my 20s, my early 20s. And I knew that something was wrong with me because I had dealt with a lot of childhood trauma, complex, and sexual abuse, which was very complex as well. And so I knew that there was something wrong. I would isolate. I would, be super irritable and do a whole bunch of things. And I started to have children. And of course, that put me in arrested development of developing more emotionally, more intellectual and everything like that to be able to understand what was happening to me. I had been in therapy my whole life, just dealing with the childhood traumas and things like that. But when I became an adult, it was a little bit different. The symptoms were different. How I was experiencing it was different. And that's why I had to go out and seek some help. And so they gave me that diagnosis of the severe depression and the anxiety. And then I began, talk therapy. There was years where I was on meds for like 2-3 years and then started to wean off and felt really good. There's never no one life situation that takes me down because I'm constantly in autocorrect all day in my head, trying to beat, negative thoughts and put positives on top of it and kind of push through. So when they gave me the diagnosis, I was like, I don't know if that's right, but maybe, and you deny it at first. It's the denial part that this is what's happening to me. And especially if you deal with friends or family members who don't necessarily believe in mental health challenges, it's hard to even vent or express what's happening to you. The time for me that it got super bad was in my 30s because I had got severely ill and I had my children, and my depression just went to it was the lowest point that I had ever been in my depression when I was in my 30s.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that you went through that. I'm sure the transition. Do you feel that, I know that you said there was a denial stage, but do you, on some level, I suppose when you got to the acceptance stage, were you relieved that you had a diagnosis for all the things you had been feeling and going through?
I was relieved because, I had getting to some understanding that depression is a part of me. It's not all of me. It's one part that sometimes just need a little bit more help than other parts of my life. The denial was just very hard because I just was like, I don't think I'm depressed, because in my mind, depressed people stay in their clothes 4 or 5 days. Nobody's eating. They're not going out. Like I'm an extrovert. So I go out, I have fun, but I have to look at how much energy that takes me, how bad I feel afterwards, and not really taking care of myself. So the denial was very strong. And then I really, really had to work through it with my therapist to definitely work and get that understanding.
Understandable. Now, Bill, you're coming to us with the perspective of a family member. You don't necessarily have to say who unless you feel comfortable, but could you tell us what mental illness they have?
I believe it was bipolar, but part of the illness, like Tanisha said, was there wasn't any conversations about it. Okay. And when I was going through it at the time, it was just like Tanisha said, the families would push it aside and didn't really want to admit that that actually was a problem. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't involved in any of the conversations that were surrounding it and any doctor's visit or anything like that. So I don't really actually know the specific diagnosis, but I believe it was bipolar and possibly schizophrenia because of the voices and things like that.
Okay. So that was going to be my second question, was if you had a conversation with that individual. Did you, now I know you mentioned not having a specific diagnosis conversation, but have you and that individual had any types of conversation regarding their mental health or mental illness?
Even today, those conversations are hard. Mm-hmm. And I think for the audience to know, I would say to have the conversations early, often, and open. Because if you don't start having the conversations, you'll get into a pattern of avoiding the conversation and avoiding the topic. And like Tanisha said, a lot of people don't look at it as something that's going to be a lifetime thing. They look at it as something that's going to come and be over with. And even now, when we talk about it or when the subject comes up, it's kind of like a past tense thing. Mm-hmm. And it's never a conversation about, okay, what's happening now. So that is a barrier.
What do you think was a barrier that stopped you from having the conversation? Would you say it was most so because you didn't want to offend that person, or was it just that it was a difficult topic to broach? What do you think was a barrier to you introducing the conversation?
Yeah, it was a combination of a difficult topic and also a combination of ignorance that went along with it, as far as not knowing what was happening. Like you said, it comes on when you're in your early 20s or 30s, and that's when it started happening. And we had a family, we had children, and everything was really complicated at the time. And there was other health issues that were involved that kind of masked the mental health issues. Mm. Okay. So for a while, the mental health issues were attributed to the health issues.
Understandable. Now, Tanisha, what do you think, as someone living with it, what do you think is the hardest thing about coming to terms with the fact that you have a mental illness?
Coming to terms is that a little part of it for me is that because I became a mental health professional. So it was like, I know what to do for myself. I got coping skills. I'll learn it. And for me, it just was so hard to put those together, to really say like, I can have depression and still help people with depression. For me, it was like, that doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. But it does make sense because, you just go back and you try to think about it and think what you need to do. And remind me of the question, because I want to make sure I'm answering it all the way.
Oh, it was, what do you think is was the hardest thing to come to terms with about about the fact that you have mental illness?
That I was a professional. I should not be dealing with these things. I should know how to manage my depression and my anxiety. This is what I'm teaching clients to do, in all the different facets of my job. And I can't do it for myself. So that denial, and then really talking to a therapist is like, it's okay. You're being too hard on yourself. You can't therapize yourself. That's the word I just used. I made that up. You can't do that to yourself. You got to have other people that are available to be able to help you.
That makes sense. Now, Bill, how would you say your life has been impacted by having a family member who has mental illness?
It'll never be the same. It's a change in your life that you have to adjust to, and it's a situation where you have to accept, put it that way. You have to accept that things are going to be this way for a while. And there are things that you look back on and you try not to say, oh, I wish there was, or maybe if this, or maybe if that. You have to kind of put those things aside and move on with and accept the way things are.
Would you say that you had to make like active life changes due specifically to the mental illness of the person?
Yeah. I think I developed the ability to compartmentalize without stuffing your emotions. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to deal with that individual and understand that you don't take anything that happened or anything that they say or do. You can't take anything personal. You have to understand that that's the illness, and you have to compartmentalize and not take it personal. But then again, like Tanisha said, go get some help. I see a therapist myself, and just so I can be emotionally stable.
Right.
And it's hard to be a caregiver of someone who has mental illness, especially if it's severe. People underestimate how hard it is for the caregiver. We're dealing with this person who has to go to the doctors, who has to take medicine, or maybe have to have a lot of boundaries on basically just going outside if that's a part of their mental illness. And the caregiver takes on all of that responsibility, where of course he's going to get vicariously traumatized by it because he has to deal with it and do all those things. So I want to make sure that caretakers know that we respect, y'all taking care of us and being there for us, because it's a really hard job. It's not easy at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Tanisha just mentioned some of the ways, which leads into my next question, which was, in what ways do you provide support to your family member with mental illness?
Constant boosting of confidence. A lot of time when people have mental illness, their confidence gets low, their self-esteem gets low, and they sometimes doubt themselves. So it's a constant boosting of confidence. Letting them know that I'm still there for them. I still love them, still appreciate them for the person they are, and that it is an illness.
Yeah, thank you. And Tanisha, there's been more talk than ever around the topic of mental health and mental illness in the past few years. Have you felt the shift? And if so, what impact has it had on you personally?
I have felt the shift. Just being a crisis therapist and a crisis counselor, it's more acceptable for you to have a mental illness. We're going to look at that first, because that's going to correlate to your behavior and all of these other things that you're doing once we're able to look at that. So I do believe that it's opening up doors because people are able to get the help that they need and ask for support from their caretaker and loved ones and friends and things like that, where it's open. I know for me, it was like once I really accepted it, was taking the medicine and everything, the first person I had to express all of this to is my mom. Mm-hmm. She ain't a person that do mental health, so it was like, I need to explain this to her and what that means to me when we're doing certain things. So that stance, you have to build in a lot of, boundaries. but I definitely think it's changing, and I'm glad that it's changing. That we're not looking at this as this person is crazy or whatever it is. That we are actually addressing that they have a mental illness, and again, it's just a part of them. It's not all of them, and this part sometimes needs a little bit more help. And as long as you have open mind to be able to go through with your person, if you're a caregiver, I think it goes well.
Yes, and I agree. I think that I've definitely noticed the shift, and I appreciate it. I think that people are more like open and honest if they're dealing with something, or even to say like, I'm going to a therapist or something like that. I think it opens up conversation and also lets people feel a lot less alone. So I definitely appreciate as that conversation continues to spread.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something like this was unheard of when I was going through it.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate a platform like this, because like you said, if the conversation is not there, then the caretakers are left in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of times that anxiety and that feeling of not knowing what's going on or what's going to happen next, or even where to get help. Because if the conversations are open and honest, then that caretaker can make their own assessments. That caretaker can go and do their own study and can do their own research on the topic, which is what I had to do on assumptions.
Yeah, and I also think that we are getting into an era now where it's not so shameful to say I have a therapist. Yes. It's not shameful to say I take medication. I know for me, because of my sense of humor and always trying to be funny, anytime I said, like, listen, my mental health won't allow me to deal with this. Like, I put it out there, like, it won't allow me to handle this. I don't have the emotional capacity. Getting rid of that shame, for me, I have to say those things. And it's to make light, but it's also for you to understand, like, I can't deal with your stuff because of my own, mental illness.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like you said, I think the removal of that shame is huge. And this platform, as well as many other, I just love that it's being talked about more, because I think, as you mentioned, it wasn't there when you were dealing with it. I know when I was younger and because I was one of those people diagnosed, I have depression and anxiety also when I was in my early teens, but nobody else had it. So I just thought I was weird and all those things. So I think the more that people talk about it, the more people are likely to get help and also feel like they're not so out there. Tanisha, what's something you wish other people knew about individuals living with mental illness?
Kind of already some of the things that I had already said, just accepting the fact that, you've seen this behavior from me, these things from me is because I have a mental illness, and being able to explain it to you without the judgment. You may be able to get an issue in your life and be great and work through it and come out and it's not an issue. For me, it's going to take a little bit more steps for me to get through that. And so I wish people would understand that you got to have the patience, that you definitely have to be able to be open-minded, supporting that person, maybe if you don't understand it, and maybe it's not something that's a part of your life, to say, hey, can I escort you to the doctor, to your therapist's office? Just try to get some more understanding about this person and their mental illness and what that looks like. And does that change the dynamics of friendships and family members? Absolutely. But if you have people who are there to support you, and I think people who deal with mental health, we want to make sure that we're going to be supported. So if you can't be supported in your family, definitely find someone else that will be able to support you, because it's hard already feeling alone. Up in your head, you feel alone because my depression tells me you're the only person going through this. Like, nobody, you see all these happy people out here in the street, it's you, it's not them, it's you. And so for me, it takes a little bit more, but definitely people understanding that, I don't need to be ashamed of having mental health. Just like if somebody smokes cigarettes, they're not ashamed to smoke cigarettes, those types of things. So let it be as common as that, and the help be as common as that.
Bill, do you think, that you've personally been affected by the stigma of mental health?
Oh, definitely. Because if you have a family member, it's almost like you have it also. If you have a family member like that, they look at you, especially being the man of the house, you're looked at, you have your own anxieties, your own stress, because, okay, I have a feeling that I'm not taking care of my household. There's something wrong with me as a parent, or as a husband, as a father, and yeah, it was very stressful.
What are some things you think people can do to help end the stigma of mental health? Like, we're obviously blessed that we have a great platform to talk about it, but what are some things that people could maybe do in their everyday life?
I think just to educate themselves, do some self-research, and there's tons of stuff online you can find now. You can do a lot of reading up on it yourself and know the signs and know the symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Understand some of the triggers that happen to it. Nobody's immune, but there are certain they call them ACE factors. There's certain things that are in your childhood that would make you more susceptible, just like any other medical trait or medical illness. If you have certain traits in your family line, or if you have certain lifestyle, the people don't realize that. Just for example, just living in the city, because of the how close people live together, and the rush of the daily living, that's already puts your anxiety level higher than everybody else's. And so if you live in the city, that's a trigger. Then you add poverty to that, and those are things to take into account that could add or lead to mental health issues.
Yeah, I read somewhere once that people in the inner city, like who grew up in their inner city, have almost PTSD level of anxiety because of the trauma and everything that they see and deal with on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
And add poverty along to that trauma, then you have a
powder keg. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, Bill, mental illness affects the whole family, not just the person being impacted. So what do you do to take care of yourself as a caregiver? I know you mentioned going to therapy yourself, which I think is huge. But what do you do to take care of yourself so you can be the best possible caregiver for your loved one?
I'm a very spiritual person, so I rely on my Father, Christ, as my support. So I read the Bible often. I study the Bible. And I try to live my life according to that, and put my worries on Him. I do what I can as a person, and as things as the world provides things to us, like mental health help and therapists and psychiatrists. I take advantage of those, but I also know that God gave those abilities to those people. So ultimately, He's in control, and I leave it up to Him. Put less stress on myself.
That's good. Tanisha, as someone dealing with, as I mentioned, I have depression, anxiety too. How do you? The way I know for me personally, as I describe that, I go through waves, and I have episodes where the depression's just bad. How do you deal with that with your family and loved ones? Because I know for me, I pull back, and I just sort of want to be left alone. You'll see me posting less. So sometimes people will reach out. I'm trying to be more proactive about it by saying like, hey, I just need some time, because you don't want to be inconsiderate and just drop off the face of the earth and have everyone worried. But how do you deal with those situations? Is it something where you reach out and tell people, or do you just pull away?
Well, in the beginning, because I didn't quite understand what I needed, I would just pull away, isolate. I'll turn my phone off. I'm not talking to people. I'm not doing anything. Now, I have older children who has gone through my roller coaster of depression with me. So they even know the signs when they know I'm going down. It's a light for them, and those things. It changed that dynamic, because it almost, when I'm in my lull, I'm almost like a child for them. Mom, are you okay? Or do you need anything? Is everything all right? Did you take a shower? Did you brush your teeth? Did you do all those things? So it became, a little bit of their burden. And so it changed that dynamic when I'm going down. When I'm in a good space and we're all good, fine. But there's days where, it's a little bit heavy, and I just have to lay in the bed. And like, there's just nothing else that I can do for myself. I can't talk. I can't read. I can't do anything. I'm not doing no introspection. I'm just laying there. And I give myself 3 days to do that. And I put my family on alert, say, hey, I'm having a hard time. When I come in the house, this is what needs to happen for me. And, is it always fair? Absolutely not. But I'm learning that I have to take care of myself, physically and emotionally, to be able to continue to go on. And even like my mom finally came around, and, like last week was a bad week at work. She was like, you need to wind down, go ahead and wind down. Like she even she sees it on my face. She's
Yeah.
able to pick up, some of the symptoms just to be able to help me. But the dynamics have changed, and some of them for the better, because I'm able to express myself a little bit more, because I've taken away that shame from myself. So now it's like, well, your mom has this, and this is how I deal with it, and these different things, versus what's wrong with mom? Why is she always crying? Why is she always upset? So it really opened up a door for me and my older children, like my son, he's 22, for he and I to have really good conversations about mental health. And my daughter, who's 19, very good conversations about mental health. So it has helped me telling them about what's going on with me.
That's good. Yeah, and that was going to be my question, is if you'd have conversation. I know you said that you thought it impacted your relationship with them as a mother, because now you have those times, but you said it's helped to open up the flow of communication, which I think is good. Bill, I know you said that was something that was difficult when you were dealing with a family member with it. Looking back, if you could go back, what do you think you would say, or how do you think you could introduce the conversation?
Wow, that's a tough question, because there's two people involved in there, and when there's a conversation involved, it takes two people.
Yes.
So if that person is not willing to talk about it, or if that person is not willing to come to terms with it, or to be honest and to have honest and open conversations about what's going on, then that's a tough question to have. I think what I did was I was honest on my end. So when the conversations came around, when things came around, and I do the same today, I'm honest about, certain situations, because I know when that family member is not taking their medication, or like she says, I know when they're going through their ups and downs, and I just put it upon myself to put the brakes and say, okay, I see this is happening, so we have a good relationship, so let's cool out for a while, take a break from one another, and we'll come back again.
So you address the topic with the person now when you see the signs? Yes.
Okay. And even like I said, even today, those conversations are in denial.
Yeah.
So even today, that person's still in denial about her illness.
Okay. Yeah, that can make it difficult. Tanisha, was there anything else that you wanted to share, just as the perspective of someone who lives with a mental illness, or even I know that you work in counseling? Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, I think we covered a lot of good ground today. My main thing, like I said, which is now my new slogan, because I'm using it, that is just a part of me. Yes. And I think everybody needs to be able to be gentle enough with themselves when they're having hard times and having troubles. And you can go out here, you can see all these different things that is to help you. But first thing is, go to therapy. If you want a therapist, and find a therapist. You have the right to find the perfect therapist that you feel like is going to suit you. If you need a psychiatrist, find a psychiatrist that you think is going to suit you. If you don't have access to those things, we do have resources available. NAMI is definitely available, Mental Health Association, Contact Lifeline. I would love for people to get help. And I'm just going to say this part, because what we do on our helpline, people call all kinds of crisis. And so for the past few weeks, of course, due to the COVID-19, people are being really shut out and isolating. So for those people who do suffer with mental illness, and their normal ways of getting that energy out, or their anxiety is walking, going to the gym, doing all these other things, I just want people to know that you're not alone, and please call somebody, because over the past 2 weeks, we've gotten at least 8 suicide calls. People are feeling alone. They just can't make it being in a house by themselves. And even if they're with friends and family, you still feel like you need to be isolated. And so my main thing is people to go get help. Do not be ashamed, because there's nothing to be ashamed about having any mental health diagnosis. So that's all I had to say for that one.
Okay. Yeah. And that was also going to be my question, is with the quarantine, have you noticed it affecting or impacting? I know you said that you're in a good space right now. I know for me personally, I am as well. And I'm so grateful, because I couldn't imagine going through this if I wasn't in that space. I mean, even as it is now, I still have like little ebbs and flow. Like Easter was really hard for me. The past couple of days actually have been a little bit of down days for me. I'm going to blame it on the rain. But thankfully overall, I feel okay, but I'm hyper aware to the signs when I'm not feeling okay, because what can you really do? Have you noticed the quarantine impacting you more or no?
Just like you, I'm in a good space right now. I'm not great, but I'm in a good space where, and fortunately, because I'm considered an essential employee, I still get to go up and go to work.
Mm,
Because in my building, there's only 2 to 3 people in there at one time, and we all have our own offices, so nobody's on each other, things like that. If I did not have that, I would totally have to put myself back on meds because we
mhm.
don't know when this is going to end.
Yeah,
Because your thoughts is racing when you have all this quiet time, and quiet can still be with the TV on different things, but it's very impactful for me not being able to go out to a restaurant.
yeah,
That's one of my self-care, things that I do for myself. Is hard, just to not be able to do it. And just like I said, on the crisis line, we're dealing with a lot of young people who've never really gone through a pandemic before, who were diagnosed early on, so now they can get the help that they need. But now everything is being taken away from them. And then on the flip side, we have older people who can't see their family and their friends, and that normal week visit where they're calling, they're 65 and 80 years old, talking about, well, I might as well, just end all of this because I don't know when this is going to end. I haven't seen my grandchildren. So I've seen it with my own personal life, and then the spectrum of what I do for a living. And
mhm.
so it is really impacting everybody. And I wish they would have more mental health commercials, or they got this all in, stay home,
Yeah,
do that for mental health as well, because people are struggling really
yeah.
hard.
I think they definitely are. I know for me, because I'm thankfully on medication, and we talked about that a little bit last week about, medication and no medication. Also, I know you mentioned changing therapist. If you need to find one, we talked about a little bit about that as well. But yeah, for me, I wish that there was more conversations about mental health because I think a lot of people are dealing with it now, not just from being alone, but you're also alone and trapped in your head. There's not,
Yes.
even if you're working, there's still a lot more time to just be in your head than there was before.
Yes.
Bill, have you noticed any impact with the quarantine on your situation?
Yeah. Just like you guys mentioned, it's very stressful on everybody. And my client calls have raised. Some of my clients are
Hmm.
calling more often.
Hmm.
Just to talk because of the stress and the anxiety everybody is feeling right now. Because we
Hmm.
don't know what's going on, and
Yeah.
the leadership that we're looking for sometimes isn't always there.
Hmm.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so they say, and especially when they say, okay, today we're going to open the cities, and then the next day, oh no, we're not going to open the cities.
Right.
Adds a lot of anxiety when there's that confusion
Hmm.
at the top,
Absolutely.
and then it adds confusion and anxiety to us and everybody else.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I think that staying connected during this time is huge. Thank
Hmm.
goodness for Zoom. This isn't an ad, but I love Zoom because I've been doing girls' night with my friends, family nights. Um, there's an app called House Party where you can go in and play games with someone. Like you video chat the person and you can play games. So I think those are huge, and I'm constantly encouraging people to connect with other people during this
Hmm.
time, even if it's just during a screen. Because I live by myself, so I've essentially been alone for 5 weeks now. It's horrible, but
Yeah.
luckily, at
Mhm.
least a couple times a week, I connect with other people, so that
Hmm.
that helps. And I think that that's really important. And I think conversations like these are so important. So I can't begin to thank you two enough, for joining me. I really appreciate it. And everybody who's watching as well, I know that mental illness can seem scary and overwhelming, but people who face them can and do well. If you're
Hmm.
dealing with a mental health condition, speak honestly to the people that you trust. If you're concerned, introduce the topic with respect and love. Seek help from a mental health
Hmm.
professional. Uh, as we mentioned, it's okay to try a few people to find someone who you connect the best with. And sometimes it's a little bit harder, especially for us. I think
Hmm.
only like 2% of therapists are African American. So sometimes
Hmm.
if you're trying to find someone who identifies with your culture, it might take a
Hmm.
little bit longer, but it's worth the time to find someone that you feel comfortable opening up with. You can
Hmm.
always contact NAMI. They offer free support and information. Now that we're quarantined, they're doing their best to transition a lot of their things virtual, So there's virtual support groups and different things like that. And it's also important to become your greatest advocate. African Americans experience disparities in mental health due to bias and lack of cultural sensitivity that often leads to misdiagnosis and inadequate treatment. If you learn as much as possible, it allows you to advocate for yourself, and be the biggest voice of reason for yourself. Don't self-diagnose yourself. Don't become Dr. Google, but learn as much as you can. So that way, when you have those conversations, it's a little bit easier. And you can also always volunteer with NAMI. We're always looking for volunteers. There's presenters where people go into the community, give presentations. There's people who answer the phones and work at the office. So if you're looking to get more involved with mental health, you can reach out to NAMI as well. And, thank you so much again, NAMI, for putting together this panel and for allowing us to use your platform. And thank you, Tanisha and Bill, for sharing your personal stories with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye.